Good morning, everybody. My name is Ofir. As it's written here, I'm the founder of the Security Group, basically the website which lists all my work. For a living, I work as a senior security consultant at ITCon, which do basically IT consulting. I like to define myself, as I said yesterday, as an RFC reader. There is a certain reason why those RFCs are there, and they should be read and followed. And we'll see the different implementation or understanding of people implementing those into their IP stack with different operating systems regarding ICMP. The ICMP protocol is, or may seem harmless at first glance. Its goals and features were outlined in RFC 792. It later was cleared in RFCs 1122, 1256, 1349, and there is a mistake, it's 1812. Basically 1122 is requirements for internet hosts. 1812 is requirements for IPv4 routers. This presentation will be mainly identifying the risk in using ICMP protocol in your network. I want to emphasize that some people are thinking that if they will block ICMP on their perimeter network or perimeter devices, they will be protected from all ICMP hazards. I think that most of the people, mainly big organizations, are using ICMP internally in order to monitor systems, see if those systems are working. I'll show you up some techniques here that can really help some internal people identify all operating systems on your internal network. So the danger is from within as well as out. Scanning is usually the major stage of an information gathering process. We are determining the characteristics of a targeted network. We can use several techniques for that, and the data collected will help us to identify a network service which may have a non-vulnerability. So we can use that in order to get into the attack network and proceed from there. ICMP, basically carried by the IP protocol, is embedded inside the IP protocol. Some interesting fields we have in the ICMP protocol, thank you, are the type field, which basically say which kind of the type this ICMP message is, and we have some subtypes which are defined by the code field, where the checksum and the rest of the data is dependent upon the ICMP message I'm using. Other characteristics that are outlined on the RFCs are that the toss byte field value should be 0 when sending ICMP queries, and of course the protocol field should be set to 1, which is ICMP. Stands for ICMP. Some of the protocol's characteristics. We use ICMP to provide feedback about some errors in the datagram processing. It doesn't make IP reliable. No ICMP messages are sent in response to ICMP messages. I think someone from there asked about allowing consent to use discovery error messages back to our network. It's fine, it's an error message. Nobody can use it in order to elicit a reply back, so it's fine. We can allow that into the network. I will speak about that a bit later. If we are going to fragment the ICMP messages, and I will show you one of those examples, then error messages will be sent only for fragment 0. Other interesting stuff may be that ICMP messages of unknown type are silently discarded, and if someone wishes to read the rest of the characteristics, we have those on their slides. We have two types of ICMP messages. the query messages and the error messages. On the query side, we have what we all know, most of the people know, which is the echo used in the ping utility. We have router advertisement, router solicitation, timestamp, information request, and address request. On the error side, we have destination unreachable, source quench, redirect, time exceeded, and parameter problem. Something I forgot to say, that this talk is based on my paper, ICMP usage in scanning. The latest version is 2.01. I think I will be like Red Hat, and the next version will be 7. I should release a new version of the paper soon, including all the stuff I did on the training when I took 30 minutes of JD and presented the way to identify some hackery tools used for ICMP scanning. So all those stuff will be posted to Black Hat site, and I'll write a short paper about it as well. How we do host detection usually? This is the obvious. We send an ICMP echo request towards targeted host. Usually if the this host is alive and not filtered, we will get an ICMP echo reply back. If we're not getting any response back, this can be because the target is down, it's configured not to answer to the query, or filtering device is preventing the incoming ICMP echo document from getting inside our protected area, or preventing the ICMP echo reply from getting out of the protected area to the internet. Ping sweeps. Ping sweeps, just a little definition query, multiple hosts using echo request is referred as ping sweep. Usually those will be targeted against a range of IP addresses of the same network. Broadcast ICMP scans. Usually known when an ICMP echo request is sent to the broadcast address or the network address of a targeted network. Only certain types of Unix and Unix-like operating systems will answer those queries. Mainly Solaris is very cooperative with that. Windows machines will not answer those. It's not a malfunction, it's just they can ignore it. The RFC says that they can have a chance of discarding those datagrams, and it is not a misbehavior. All the BSDs operating systems will behave the same. They will not answer anything in broadcast address or the network address. Well, ICMP echo is not the only query type we have with ICMP. The other query types I will discuss here are timestamp requests, information requests, and address mask requests. ICMP timestamp request and reply, they are used to determine the amount of latency that a particular network is experiencing. Yeah, experiencing. When we are sending a timestamp request, we set the originate timestamp here. The receiving host fills in the receiving timestamp when he receives this datagram. When he sends it out, he fills in the transit timestamp. This allows us to know the time it took for the traveling from one host to another, and the time it took for processing our request. I would be using timestamp request and replayability inside networks because, in my opinion, it's better than ping. I get more information out of it. I can measure my network latency. I get more information out of it. ICMP information request and reply. Basically, it's obsolete. But again, we have some operating systems that answer that. That's really neat. Thank you for those implementers of having that inside and not removed. Usually, diskless workstations were using that at boot time to allow them to discover their network address. Address mask request and reply is intended to use again by diskless clients or diskless systems to obtain the subnet mask address. Again, it was only was aimed at internal systems, internal segments, and not to use on the internet. The same things we've done with ICMP echo regarding mass scans, which are broadcast, sending ICMP echo requests to broadcast, we can do with the same queries which are non-echo ICMP. We can send non-echo ICMP requests towards the broadcast address and network address, and to do a non-echo ICMP sweep as well. For the full mapping of which operating systems answer what, you have on my paper, I think it should be on the CD that you have. You have on the appendix E on the paper, at least saying which answer what. For example, Solaris sensor timestamp request aimed at broadcast address and echo request aimed at the broadcast address helps us very much to identify it. This is a slide saying who will answer our queries. Basically, first we need hosts that are there are listening states, running an operating system that have implemented the non-echo ICMP query message type that was sent. Novell and their implementations of TCP/IP have only ICMP echo request and reply, so don't expect to get an answer other than that from a Novell network machine. Those hosts have to configure to reply to the query message type. One of the conditions for answering for ICMP address messages to be an authoritative agent for address masks. And of course, if we want to be able to get those replies, we have to have the ability to answer queries and the broadcast address. Those were just simple stuff. Most of the simple stuff is not defined by any book I've read or by any paper. Usually, like you've seen in the previous lecture, Simple Nomad was talking about information requests. The guys from Foundstone are talking in their book about address mask requests and timestamp requests. But everything works. You can try everything on anything and it will be producing information. But the most fun I get from using host detection with ICMP is using the advanced methods. Advanced methods are being used for eliciting an ICMP error message back from a probe machine and discover its existence. This means that we are using the ability of the system to send an ICMP error messages back to us, reporting a problem, to understand its being. We can do, we can do that on several methods. We can play with some IP header parameters, mainly the header length field and the IP option field. We can use non-valid values inside some fields in the IP header. For example, playing with the protocol field, we will see an example. We can abuse fragmentation, and we can use the UDP scan host detection method. The first method I will be discussing is trying to elicit an ICMP parameter problem error message back from the probe host. It's type 12, and the codes we will get back are either code 0 or code 2. What that means? Code 2 is sent when the header length or the total packet length values of the IP datagram do not appear to be accurate. Now, if we are going to play with the header length, then most of the firewalls will not let us pass because they will not be able to determine what is the underlying protocol we are using within the IP headers. This means we can put inside TCP or UDP or ICMP within the offending packet, but the firewall will not be able to know what is the protocol, will not be able to understand the entire information we are putting inside the IP payload. So you better play with the total length, which is really neat. You just put bigger length or lower length, so nobody can find other information, and the other system just will elicit back the error message. If you play with the IP options, then you'll get code 0 back from those probe machines. Here we see an example for that. I'm using a tool called ICMP, ICMP from Mike Franzen. On the last slides I have all the reference for the tools. Here I'm sending from a source to a destination using 20 packets and 100% odd IP header length. Sending that to a host 192.168.515. And as you see, I get parameter problem, and the offending packet is one of the packets I've sent. It's on byte 21. I played with all the header lengths. It got confused. It's sending me the error. IC can be used for other tests as well, testing firewall rules and testing IDS systems. Pretty neat to check it out. What if I'm trying to determine the ACL using this method? What if I'm not receiving any error message back from the probe host when I know for certain that the type of error I'm presenting should elicit a reply? Maybe this filtering device that is there, or the thing that I'm trying to understand if it's there, is not allowing the diagrams of this kind of bad field we are using to get inside the probe network. Or it may filter the type of ICMP message we are using. Or it just blocks the parameter problem error messages for getting outside to the void. And Simple Nomad mentioned filtering both ways. This is another example of why we're so need to filter our traffic in both ways. Because if I do not allow ICMP in and just allow, for example, one port open, let's say port 80, and I play with those parameters, then I will be able to get the understanding that there is something there and there are hosts there. One of the examples I'm giving here with the non-valid field values is using a protocol number that is unused on that machine. I can get all those protocol numbers from IANA, from that organization, and decide that I'm going to use one of those values which is definitely not being used. What I should get back is an ICMP destination unreachable, protocol unreachable, which means that protocol is not being used on the machine. If we are using a value which definitely is not representing any valid protocol, and we are not getting any reply back, this means that filtering this device is probably filtering that host. With Nmap 2.54 beta 1, Filter have introduced this type of scan. We can see on the next example here that I'm using verbose mode and using the SO mode, which is protocol scan. What Nmap do is sending only the IP headers with no data to hosts. Here is an example of scanning my NT2K, Windows 2K professional box. You see the ICMP, ICMP, TCMP, and UDP protocols available on that machine. You can identify Nmap by looking at that datagram and seeing that there is only IP header and no payload. Fragmentation. Fragmentation is very nice. We're using the ability or the fact that hosts will wait for the rest of the fragments to arrive before they try to reassemble everything back. So if we're sending just few fragments and letting the host wait for the rest of them, not giving it to that host, we're going to get back an ICMP fragment to reassembly time exceeded back from that host. So basically we're again using something that is allowed. We can use that through a port or through other means, and we just don't get a reply back will get an ICMP fragmentation reassembly time exceeded. Now we can fragment ICMP as well. Some of the ISPs will block fragmented ICMP datagrams, but other will not. So you can just play with any embedded protocol inside. It can be TCP, UDP, ICMP. You can understand ACLs by that. It's really nice. Another example can be playing with the first TCP packet. I'll send enough information inside the first TCP packet. I'll include the flags inside, all the information needed for usual packet filtering firewall to let it through. This means I'll put the sockets in, the protocol, I'll have the fragment offset correctly, put the flags, and just send it away. Some of the older firewalls out there will be susceptible to this attack. Some will just wait for the other fragments to arrive before reassembly, and then we will try to cross that with their rule base. Now, nice things I was thinking about is, what if the firewall sends me an error message and it's not the host? What if the firewall is configured to spoof the replies from those hosts? Some of the packet filtering firewalls do that. Then by looking at that IP stack, and those fields I'm getting from that firewall, I can decide on which operating system that firewall is running on, if I'm not able to directly query it. Because when you configure a firewall, the first rule you should have is no traffic is allowed to the firewall whatsoever. And this is a way in which I use the ability of the firewall to spoof replies from those hosts he guards, and to go through its replies and just figure out which operating system the firewall is running on. For example, if I know that Checkpoint Firewall 1 is using NT, I will know that in order to make a denial of service, I will need less and less traffic than if that firewall was running on a Solaris machine, for example. UDP scans are pretty neat as well. Basically, when we are sending a UDP datagram and it hits the closed ports, we will get ICMP destination unreachable, port unreachable back, type 3, code 3. Now, we know that UDP is unreliable, and we just don't like to use that. But what if we are seeing? What if we are going to use some advanced modes? Here, for example, is just the usual example of sending a UDP datagram using HPing2 to a closed port, eliciting the ICMP port unreachable. But what if we are going to use some advanced methods? We'll look at the ports list. We will pick up a UDP port which is definitely closed. One of the examples might be port 0, but if we're not going to let others to understand that we are probing them and use that port, we can just pick other ports as well. Just looking at the list which IANA provides us, and just pick up a port which is not used. Now, if we are not getting any reply back from that host, it's probably filtered. Now we can just use 2 or 3 ports that which we know that are definitely closed, and do that. Shouldn't be one after the other. We can just have some time intervals, and receiving those replies, we'll understand that we have a filtering device filtering those kind of stuff. With Nmap, Fyodor has introduced a threshold. Just bombarding the host probe, and when a threshold is reached, he's saying that the filtering device is probably there. But with the method I just have introduced, you can just probe with 1 or even 2 datagrams and be sure that we have a filtering device in place. Another method, which is a bit of a configuration problem, is if internal routers have a path MTU or an MTU that is smaller than the MTU for a path going through the border router, those routers may elicit back an ICMP fragmentation needed and don't fragment bit was set, error message back to the proper Arkin initiating source. This is usually do not happen. You don't see that, but if you set your MTU to a value which is less than your border router, then someone can just send those datagrams inside and probe your internal routers. Some other techniques which were introduced, I think, last year was the inverse mapping. Inverse mapping is based on the nice thing that routers do. Routers will give internal information back to the prober if they can't reach an IP address within the segment they are configured to route through. This way we can probe for hosts that are not there, or the entire IP addresses or IP range of a certain targeted network, and get all of those IP addresses that are simply not being used by that segment. One example might be, here I'm using ICM push in verbs mode, sending an echo request to a targeted IP. It was through my ISP, so I'm hiding the IPs. I get time exceeded because the router tried to handle that to other hosts, or to that host I am sending this information to, and just gave me the information back that he has time exceeded and he didn't succeed in handling that datagram to that host. So now definitely know that this host is not existing within that range of IPs. Well, this is just a slide about trace routing, but you can read Mike Schiffman's Firewalk paper, which is referenced at the end of the talk. I want to go through some deeper things. The most fun stuff with ICMP, which I have discovered, is regarding ICMP usage in active fingerprinting process. We can use ICMP query messages, we can use ICMP crafted echo messages or query messages, and we can use the ICMP error messages. 2 days ago, I just posted to Backtrack and other stuff regarding ICMP error messages that would allow us to identify AIX, DGUX, and Linux. We'll explain it a bit later. The first approach is called the who answer what approach. We have a database calling which operating system will answer for what kind of ICMP query message. Then we can see the replies coming back from a probe machine and see if it's correlated with our database. It will help us to identify certain groups of operating systems. It will not help us to say, yeah, this is one kind of operating system, but it will help us to reduce the number or to a group of operating systems, and then we could launch other probes against that group. One example I am fond of giving is Linux and BSD-based operating systems with default configuration were answering for, or are answering for, timestamp requests and echo requests. Now, before Microsoft released Windows 2K, no Microsoft operating system was acting the same like those operating systems like Linux and BSD flavors. Now with Windows 2K, miraculously, Microsoft is acting like the BSD operating systems and Linux and answering for ICMP timestamp request and echo request. And yes, they are mimicking the behavior of the BSD flavors, and I'll show it with other examples as well. One example that we can use the who answer what approach in order to understand which operating systems we are probing is, for example, with ICMP information request. We have a bunch of IPs we wish to query. We send ICMP information requests, and HP, Ultrix, and X will answer. We take those IPs and send ICMP address mask request, and miraculously, Ultrix will answer. And hey, is the only operating system that will answer. So we have Ultrix. Another example is with non-echo ICMP requests and at the broadcast address. And I recommend just blocking the broadcast address at your router and on the firewall, so it will not be susceptible to those probes or to a denial of service attack. We send ICMP timestamp request and the broadcast address of the network. Solaris, HPUX, and Linux will answer. Then we take those IPs and send information request and the broadcast address. HPUX will answer. Now from those two operating systems we need to decide on, we send ICMP address mask request, a regular one, towards those two IPs or number of IPs we have now. Solaris will reply, Linux will not. We have Solaris, Linux, and HD. Another nice thing I like with the IP header is the DF bit, or RFC 791 defined 3-bit field used for various control flags in the IP header. Bit 0 is reserved, should be, must be 0. We will see that we can play with it as well. The first bit 1 is called the don't fragment bit. 0 value will be equivalent to main fragment, and 1 is don't fragment. Bit 2 is the more fragments field. Well, basically 0 is equivalent to this is the last fragment, and 1 more fragments are coming. If we look at the ICMP query replies that we are receiving back, we can see which operating system would set by default the DF bit in their replies. Those would be Sam Solaris, HPUX, and X 4.3 machines. So you should add that. In the next example, it's a simple ICMP echo request aimed at a Sun Solaris 3.7 operating system machine. We can see that here. We can see the DF bit is set. On the reply, this is TCP dump. And we can see it here. With Sim, a tool I helped to introduce some stuff inside, you can use the tool and we'll automatically tell you if the DFB is set on the reply. So you don't have to look inside the TCP dump and just go fooling yourself there or not getting into results. What does HPUX 1030 and 11X are doing? Why they are setting the DF bit with their replies? HP uses some proprietary method for the path NTU discovery process using ICMP echo request. If an attacker or a simple prober is querying an HP machine, the reply will get back without the DF bit set. Now, the MTU is unknown between those two systems, and what the HPUX machine will do, just probe back. Where is that? It will probe back our machine. It will set the MTU there, or the datagram size, to the maximum it can set on the wire. Now it will set the DF bit on all of those datagrams, so it will, if it will hit a router that is not able to route the datagram through, because the MTU, the other side of the router, is less than the MTU, the maximum size or the size of the datagram we're using, it will send back an ICMP error message saying this is too big, the data is set, I cannot fragment. What it will do, by using that, we will know eventually the MTU that we should use between those two systems. Because at the end, we will get ICMP echo reply from the host that queried the HP machine. So in the next probe, where the MTU is known now, the reply that we will receive will have the DF bit set. So if we are now routing through a different path and we hit different routers, the HP machine will understand that it has to reduce the MTU used and to use another value. Was it too fast? Someone want me to repeat that? No. Okay. Now, AX43 do the same. On the Snort mailing list, I've seen a trace which someone have sent to Lance Spitzner, and it was from an AX43 machine. Basically, they do the same. HP has an advisory that actually says to disallow this ability because it can be used for denial of service. So I guess it's not that helpful. When you will see that someone is querying you with a datagram, it will be usually 1,500 bytes. All the payload will be 0. So we'll definitely know that something is wrong, and it may be related to the path MTU discovery process using ICMP echo request used by an HP machine or an X machine. I strongly recommend to turn that off if you have an HP machine or X machine. Another field that helps us to determine which are the operating system that we query is the TTL field. According to its value, we can understand that, for example, Unix and Unix-like operating systems use 255 as the value for that field. Compaq, Truth 64 version 5.0, and Linux 2.0.x based kernels are the exception. They are using 64 as their IPTTL field with the ICMP query replies. Microsoft using 128, and Microsoft Windows 95 uses 32. So basically, if you see 32 in the reply, you say, hey, this is a 95 machine, usually. Sure, you comply with the parameters, but how much of you do really bother to play with that? Now, we have a different value for the request, and we have a different value for the replies. Linux uses 64 again. All the FreeBSD, Solaris, OpenBSD, NetBSD, HPUX use 255. Most of the Windows operating systems use 32. And there it is, Microsoft Windows 2000, thank you again, uses 128. So if we correlate the information from the request and replies, and there is a mistake, it's 32 here as well, we can just identify Linux machines based on kernel 2.2x and 2.4, Linux kernel based on 2.0.x, Microsoft Windows 2K, and Microsoft Windows 95, which is pretty neat, I think, at least. Questions until here? Someone? Okay. This is an example with fragmentation. This is pretty nice. Not understood thing, but it gives me the fingerprint, so I don't mind. If we're using fragmented ICMP address mask requests, on those operating systems that answer for that kind of query, we have Ultrix, Windows 95, 98, 98 SE, ME, NT below SP4, HPUX inside Solaris, we can distinguish between those operating systems. Now, you don't have table 2 in section 2.5 because it's in the paper. My mistake, sorry. The example shown here using sync sends an address mask request to a certain IP address. We get the correct address mask, and it seems nice, and we do that. What I've done here is sending address mask request 2 packets, fragmented it to 8 bytes and payload to that IP address. What we are seeing here, that Solaris is sending us back 0.0.0.0 back as a reply. Now, HPUX do the same. So we have Solaris and HP sending us back 0.0.0.0. Now, when I've tried to play with that on my different ISPs, since I have a dial-up, I've seen that some of them are blocking the fragments. So it may not work with your ISP. It depends if it's blocking ICMP fragments. Now I send ICMP address mask request, I get the IPs for the operating system that answer that query. I now send it fragmented, and I get again the 0.0.0.0 thing with Solaris and HP. I take the other bunch that still replies with the same correct address mask and send another combination of fingerprint which called, I'm sending that address mask with a code field with different than 0. I'll just talk about it in a minute, but eventually Ultrix will reply with the same code I've used, and only Microsoft operating systems will use a code which is equal to 0. So I could just have Ultrix again, isolated, and Solaris and HP together. This is another thing I like, which I've called tossing OSs out of the window. What we see here is the toss byte. The toss byte is having 3 fields inside. First field is the proceedings field, 3 bits long, intended for prioritization. Next field is called the toss field, has 4 bits long. It's the type of service field, and definition is to describe how a network should make trade-offs between throughput, delay, reliability, and cost in routing and IP datagram. And the last bit must be 0 bit, which should be unused, must be unused. Now, what are the rules for sending ICMP error messages with the toss field? They are defined in RFC 1349, and they say ICMP error message is always sent with the default toss value of 0. An ICMP request message may be sent with any value in the toss field, and the reply message for that one is sent with the same value in the toss field that was used in the request. It's all nice. Here we have an example with FreeBSD for home machine I have at home. Sending, again with sync, toss field which equals 8 hex, getting back 8 hex in that field. And again, using another value which is not represented by the known toss field values of 10 hex, and again getting 10 hex back in the reply. Now, what would Windows 2K would do? Well, it's all nice and fun. It will zero out the toss bits, toss field in the reply, which really should be the behavior according to RFC 1349. Problem is that Ultrix and Novell network will do the same. So we have a method in order to distinguish between those. First, we will send ICMP echo request with dot field value which is different than 0. The reply with the dot field set to 0 will get those three operating systems. If we will look at the TTL of 255, sure we'll get a TTL less than that, but understanding what was the initial TTL will hit Ultrich's machine. The TTL is 128. We have Windows 2K family and Novell network. Sending an ICMP timestamp request will reveal reply from the Windows 2K machines, no reply from the Novell network. Now, we can take the other OSs which did not reply with a TOS field set to 0 because, I don't know, they have some people like Microsoft, and yeah, no, Rooster is not here, which implement unbelievable IP stack implementation. I don't know why, but if you set the ICMP timestamp request with TOS field set to a value other than 0, they act weirdly. Again, we can look at the other OSs and Windows 98, 98C, and ME group of operating systems. I've told you I'll get back to the unused field. It's, I know that there are a lot of data around here. If I'm doing that too fast, just tell me, I'll slow down. We have the unused bit. It's near all those DF and MF bits. What would happen if we set that bit? I mean, yeah, it's there, so now why not using it? We'll set it to a value, we set it up to 1, and remarkably, Solaris and HPUX 11.0 will echo back the reserve bit. We can see this here. We set the unused bit, we're getting it back again. Sure, we'll have the DF bit set as well with an HP. Here it's a Solaris, which we can see the difference. Here it's just the unused. If you see the value is 80, we divide it to the binary, you can see what is set or not. Should add it in my presentation. Here we can see that Solaris used the value of C0, which set the DF and the unused field back. Now, if Solaris is not, if HP is not using the pass-NTU discovery with ICMP echo, it will not probe you back and will not set the DF bit with the reply. So we can differentiate between Solaris and HPUX. If you wish to turn off the stuff with Solaris, the DF bit, or the pass-NTU discovery, you're turning off all IP pass-NTU discovery process. So don't do that, because you need that. Here we can see Singh again, and I asked the author, and it's worth mentioning his name, did a great job, Alfredo Andreas Omela. Here we can see the unused bit set, along with the DF bit set, with the reply we're getting from the Solaris machine. Another thing is that many were playing now with the IP header, but we can have here some other cool stuff. If we are setting the DF bit with our request, this bit will be echoed back by operating systems answering for our queries. Now, some operating systems are working in conjunction with their own rules regarding setting the DF bit with their queries themselves. This is a bad example. I use Solaris, and mainly on default it will set DF bit back. But there are exceptions which act correctly and do not echo back the DF bit. Linux, based on kernel 2.2, 2.4, with the various test kernels, and Ultrich's and Novell network, they are the ones. And again, we have something a bit wicked here, deciding which is what. What we need? We send the DF bit echoing with the ICMP echo request. And one thing I want to emphasize is that echo request, timestamp, information request, other specific requests, the replies we will get are different. Don't expect to receive the same results on the replies you get for different wire messages, because they are all different. Here we set it with ICMP echo request. We set the DF bit, not echoed Linux, Ultrix, novel network. Other OSs will echo the DF bit. Second test will be done with ICMP address mask request. Not echo the DF bit will be Microsoft Windows 9898 SE and Ultrix. Now we can correlate this information and identify Ultrix from those from that group. Now, according to the TTL field value, we can then understand what are the Linux machines, because Linux will use 64, Novell will use 128 as the TTL value on the replies. Now, if we then will use ICMP timestamp request and set the DF bit with them, from that bunch of operating systems, which we understand which are the Linux operating systems, which is the Ultrix, and which are the Microsoft Windows 9898 SE. Again, we will have Microsoft Windows ME and Microsoft Windows UK family as the rest of the operating system. So basically, we now identified Ultrix, Linux, Solaris and OpenVMS, and Microsoft Windows ME and 2K. Sure, we have two groups, but we can do other tests on those and find and identify the operating system. So basically, with those, with that technique, we can identify lots of operating systems. This is my favorite one. This is basically was my first post to Backgrade regarding ICMP. This is a very cool thing. If we're using code field value, which is different than 0 with ICMP echo request, then remarkably, Microsoft operating systems will zero out that field on the reply. Now, the next trace shows a Linux machine running kernel 2.2.14 reply back with the same code I've used, which is 38.26 hex. Microsoft Windows 2K Professional, for example, just zero it out. If you want an ultimate test that will say, is that a Microsoft Windows operating system based machine, or is that a Unix or Unix-like operating system machine, this is the test you definitely need to do. All Microsoft based operating systems will zero out on the reply.
Yeah. What about Service Pack 5 that's not mentioned at least in the list?
I use 6A. I hope they fix that, or fix something in 5. But if you have a box with 5 on, then drop that and send me the information.
Alright.
I don't think they play with that on this one. I don't think nobody there even thought about those stuff. Again, all the Microsoft-based operating system will do the same, and we can just identify them among the other. Here's another test we can use with timestamps, for example. I mentioned the remarkable implementation of Microsoft 4 or 5 slides ago. Here we have excellent example. If we are sending ICMP timestamp request with that code field set to a value other than 0, we'll first do the regular timestamp request. We'll have a bunch of operating systems which we do not know what they're doing. We have no reply from Windows 95 or Windows NT4 workstation SP6A. And again, if we will query them with ICMP echo, the TTLs they are using, we will be able to identify 95 from NT4, so basically we'll know those two boxes are. Now the rest of the operating system, here is a nice thing. If we want to isolate the rest of the Microsoft operating systems, We are setting the set now ICMP timestamp request with a code field set to a value different than 0, and remarkably, Windows 98, 98SC, and E2K family will not reply. Why? I don't know. Other OSs will reply, and we will have that information, but again, hey Rooster, I was talking about remarkable IP stack implementation in Microsoft. Yeah. Another thing is inconsistency with Linux. Well, the number of inconsistency with Linux I found are pretty big. One of that is if I'm sending ICMP echo request with a code field set to a value different than 0, it will not zero out on the reply. But if I send timestamp and set it with a code field set to a value different than 0, then Linux, remarkably, will zero out on the reply. Why? I don't know, it's inconsistency. I was thinking that all implementations will use the same basic rules regarding all the replies, but eventually they do not. So with this test, we can identify Linux machines, Windows 95, NT4, and again, we have a group of 98, 98SC, ME, and 2K. Now, this is like a grand slam of every code field value different than 0 replies I get, so maybe we've been talking about everything here. Error messages is another nice thing I just started to play with. Since I was thinking, hey, with query messages we have so much stuff, why the error messages should be different than that? Most of the basic stuff was discovered by Fyodor. Great article about fingerprinting, but there are much more stuff than he discovered. Basically, message quenching is the number of messages which are sent, error messages, from a host. So if we are just banging on a closed port, measuring the time interval, seeing how much error messages are sent in that interval, some operating systems would be detected that way. I need a lab in order to do that, so I don't have any results here. Another nice thing is ICMP error message quoting. The RFC said we should use 8 bytes on the quote from the offending operating system other than the IP header, which is quoted. Well, Linux and Sans Solaris quote more. Sans Solaris just quote more, and Linux take it to the extreme. You can have, again, error messages with lengths that is usually huge. One thing to remember, you have to have data inside the offending packet that can be echoed back in order to have that huge reply back. So basically you don't have any upper barrier for how much would be echoed back or quoted back from the offending message with Linux. Another nice thing which I'm working on is message echoing integrity. Sure, there are some stuff which is known from Fyodor's paper again. Again, the example, this is a direct quote, XBSDI and send back IP total length field which is 20 byte too high. Well, I now can differentiate, and it's not reading the presentation, I can now differentiate between X 4.1 to above version of X, which are 4.21, 4.3, and 4.3 with fixed backs too. Why? Sure, they all send 20 bytes too high on the echoed IP total length field, but the 4.1 also, if we're using UDP datagram in order to elicit the error message back, it's set to checksum of the UDP to 0. Now, the other operating systems, the more newer operating systems of X, just echo correctly the checksum of the offending UDP packet. So we have some kind of fingerprinting between X machines as well. other interesting stuff here. Checksum 0, IP ID. Another thing I've sent to Patrick is setting the IP ID with ICMP errors with FreeBSD for X. Well, I found it myself, but apparently someone found it the month before and just posted to closed FreeBSD mailing list. What is going there is just that before version 4.11, the error message that was sent with IP ID of the offending packet. The first 8 bits were replaced with the second 8 bits. So you got other value for IP ID, but the reason was they miscalculated that. So the first 8 bits were replaced with the second 8 bits. Another example might be the toss field in ICMP port unreachable error messages. Something I was playing with, posted to Backbreak as well. Linux will act like a router regarding ICMP error messages. This means that for each ICMP error message Linux produces, it will use 6 hacks in its precedence field. This is quite amazing because I don't think Linux is a router by default. Now, we have other means to differentiate between operating systems according to their error messages. Another thing is toss echoing with ICMP error messages. This means I send a toss field set to a certain value with an offending UDP datagram, and I get the same toss value in the IP header of the offending packet. Not just echoed back, but in the IP header of the error message as well. AIX, DGUX, and Linux do that. And since Linux as well sets the preceding field to 6 hacks, we can understand that we are using Linux. Since AIX put the IP total length of the echoed offending packet with 20 bytes more, we can know this is an AIX, and here's DGUX alone. And again, we can differentiate between the AIX as well. Using a big ICMP echo request will not help you do anything, just burden on your network. For the last 9 minutes of my talk, I'll try to speak about some firewalls and why some filtering devices will not work. I've written a little paper, I don't know how much of you seen that, called Unverified Fields, Problem with Firewalls and Firewall Technologies Today, just in the first few days of October. Basically, firewalls will fail to correctly understand the meaning of crafted ICMP diagrams. I've tested that against Checkpoint Firewall 1 version 3.0b, follow 4.1 SP2, and put the unused bit on and send ICMP echo request. On the replies, I got from Solaris box the unused bit set again, so I know it's a Solaris box. Now, this is not as other people are using open ports in order to get a reply back, because I can play with those on closed ports as well if I can reach the operating system. If I can reach the operating system with a query message, then I can understand from those fields the firewall is not checking what is the operating system that is being used. Now, I think that this is a major malfunction on firewalls because we rely on them to defend ourselves from those stuff. All firewalls are doing is just looking usually at the sockets pair or the information they need in order to validate it against their rules. They will not dig inside other IP header fields. If they will, it will hit performance quite remarkably, and I think it's another problem with firewalls. We're talking about filtering traffic in and out, and this slide and the next slide talks about why we should filter and what in my opinion should be filtered. Well, if we see the only type of ICMP message I recommend to allow from the internet is type 3 code for path until discovery process. It's an error message. Nobody can probe you with that error message. They can try to maybe lower your MTU for a bit, but other than that, they cannot do anything. What will happen if you will allow your outbound to have ICMP error message? Well, we've seen what we can do with just crafting packets, whether if it's TCP packets, UDP diagrams, or ICMP diagrams, in order to elicit error message back from those systems. So error messages back to probing host or back to the void do not allow. The problem is with internal hosts, what you're doing inside your internal machines, are you allowing from one segment to ping other segments or use other query message type of ICMP in order to see if your machines are alive and working? Well, I do not recommend doing that for all of your users. If you can limit that by putting some ACLs on your router or rules on your firewall, put only those machines you need from a management station, and that's it. You really don't need to have that. 5 minutes, okay. Here's another slide. Well, I have more slides. Here's another slide basically describing what can be seen, what should be filtered. For reliability sake, I think your lawyers will agree with me that some of the ICMP messages should be blocked from your network outside, like ping or other stuff. Again, if someone needs that for network management or understanding what happens in his network, filter his management station or their management stations and only allow them to do that. Because with all the stuff I've introduced here, you can do a lot of probing and you can fairly understand what goes. I will not go into passive fingerprinting. It can take another 2 hours to speak about it. I will take questions now and we will wrap this up. No questions?
One.
Yeah.
Have you also looked at Cisco iOS behavior in this?
I'm working on Cisco now because I got some neat results from their routers. One example would be RFC 1812 says that you have to set your precision field to 6 hacks on the arrows. Now, you should echo back the toss field. Now, Cisco routers, it was iOS 11x to 12.2, don't set the toss field, don't echo back. So I just need to find other networking devices I can use and see if I can play with networking devices as well. It would be fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you considered putting together a tool that will make this a lot easier than manually using Sing?
I'm working on that. Well, Simple Nomad told me that he will do a tool until a month or 2 months from DEF CON. Well, I'm still waiting. But basically, eventually I'll have a tool doing everything. You can use Sting and write a script with Sting in order to automate some of the tests. But to correlate the information, we'll have to do that manually. So until we have some automated tool that will understand how to correlate all that information, manual TCP dumps or whatever Sing can use. Another recommendation, if someone is using Snort and using some tools on Windows for ICMP, you get the wrong result with Snort. So use Linux, TCP dump, and another sniffer in order to correlate the information and understand that you receive the actual information back. Another question? Or okie dokie. Thank you for having me here.